That was the thought. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of YEV, the live EV podcast with myself, Tim Aylan, Kevin Booker, and Alex Grant. And we're here to keep the conversation balanced. It's not just about EV only. It's not just about petrol heads only. It's about that grey, that middle area, just to make sure we're being, balanced. Isn't it right, chaps?
Absolutely. That's right.
Absolutely. Right. And today we are talking about, are the government getting their EV strategy right? And is the net zero a fantasy? So I thought what we could do is, first of all, start with net zero. Alex, do you want to give us a definition of net zero in terms of UK?
Yeah, so I mean, net zero in terms of the UK is this aimed for it's an agreement that most of the countries in the world have signed up to try and reach net zero by 2050, and it's under the Paris Agreement. It's trying to kind of prevent global temperatures rising at I think it's 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. Pretty much all of the world is signed up to it, including the UK government. And what it basically means is that as an economy, any CO2 you produce, you have to be offsetting in some way. So you're basically reducing as much as you can, and anything that you can't, you're then offsetting in some way. So essentially, you would have a net zero carbon impact on the world. So net zero CO2 emissions.
So really, it's all about balance, like this podcast.
Absolutely.
There it is.
You'd almost think we rehearsed that, and we haven't.
No, it really wasn't. It's not the normal YEV, chaps. Anyway, moving swiftly on. So I mean, I think there's a lot of negativity and a lot of calling out of net zero recently, and the government is into turmoil anyway. But I thought it'd be valid just to talk about, what's going well from an EV transition point of view, and what's not going so well. And why not have a good old chat about it, because that's what we like to do best. So, chaps, I don't know who wants to start us off, but who thinks what kind of the positives and negatives do you think with the government EV strategy at the moment? Can you kind of focus on anything that that's going particularly well or particularly badly?
Well, I was going to say, you were taking a deep breath there, Kev. I don't mind you starting first on this. I could be here a while.
I think the big thing is with it, the strategy is it's not fleshed out enough. It's like, there's mixed messages with it. That's what I think is, and people don't like, in many respects, it's been quite strong with the ZEV mandate. That's a very strong message, but then it's not being followed up by a clear, coherent strategy around it. And I think Alex will be much better at explaining this. Is people don't know where they stand, and the thing, it's like markets and everything. Uncertainty is the biggest issue.
Are you saying that it's rushed?
Potentially, it could be anything, isn't it? It's just not clearly kind of defined. One of the lines was, I think Alex has said before, significant electric range. But what is significant electric range? Is that 2 miles? Is that 200 miles? How do you people like hard facts, and that makes it easier for you to design and build vehicles that fit those kind of ideas.
The ZEV mandate and everything that sort of splinters off that, going back to when all of this stuff was starting to be announced back in about 2017, I think it was, is a complete, it's a case study in poor communications, because as Kev said, the original wording was significant zero emission capability, and that presumably means full hybrid. It might mean plug-in hybrid. It might mean plug-in hybrid with a set amount of range. It's never really been defined. And so what you can assume from that is that a a petrol or diesel vehicle in the spec that we know it, so as in with no amount of electrification whatsoever, will not be allowed. But I mean, it could even draw the line at, I mean, some mild hybrids will let you coast with the engine off for short periods of time. You could count that as a significant zero emission capability. I think there's always been that kind of ambiguity left into it deliberately to try and allow for see what happens. And I think that's been a bit of a problem, because then what you've had is that the deadline moved forward from the initial 2040 to 2035, and then there's all this discussion about 2030, which doesn't relate to EVs at all. That's actually the remaining non-EV share that the 2030 deadlines really refer to. And so I think it's become a bit of a political football, hasn't it? It's one of these things that gets discussed a lot and has been kind of heavily politicized about whether it's possible or not. But the messaging is not clear enough, and it's quite hard to kind of make those decisions when you don't really know what's going on. And we're actually seeing that at the moment. I mean, it's budget week this week, and we still don't know what's going on with the expensive car supplement, and whether that will apply to EVs over £40,000, whether that'll be adjusted for everything. We know there's about a 10% price difference between the two on average lease prices last year. There needs to be some adjustment to that, whether that's across the board or just for EVs. I'm not entirely sure, but it's only a few weeks until the new tax year, and there's no real clarity on that whatsoever. And the problem is that people remember, right? So if you think back to diesel, I mean, diesel was the low CO2 thing, and it was all about CO2, 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 and then suddenly it was like air quality. Everyone's going, oh, hang on a minute, I thought these cars were green. And then all of a sudden you've got like one sort of emissions and another sort of emissions, and people are talking about, well, they're really bad for this, but people are going, but I thought they were good on emissions. It's like, no, that's a different type of emissions. And it's like, I'm in the industry, I kind of get it, right? We kind of understand all of this stuff, but it's kind of, to your average person on the street, they hear the word emissions, they don't know whether that's CO2, NOx, they don't know what it is, do they? And so there's a complete lack of kind of consistency and kind of really clear, this is what we're doing and this is what and stick to it. Give everyone a deadline and stick to it. And I think that's become harder then again to stick to, because of, we'll come on to this I'm sure later, but the state of the economics behind it is a bit tricky as well.
Yeah.
I think consistency is the big issue with this. And
yeah. Go on.
Yeah, and coming off the back of the diesel thing, where diesel was the green fuel and then suddenly it wasn't, I think that's possibly one of the reasons that people are kind of going, well, we were told that EVs were good, and then all of a sudden they're kind of waiting to go, yes, but where's the but? When are we suddenly going to be told that EVs are really bad and we can't drive those either? I'm not surprised there's some consumer skepticism over it because of the inconsistency that's still within. I mean, it's only 10 years since, well, it's not even 10 years since Dieselgate kicked off, so it's everything has kind of happened very quickly on that front.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like I said before, I think it's been rushed. I don't think there's been enough. It's quite a complex transition. It's not just as simple as we're just going to change for electric vehicles, because you've got all the other elements to think about, because it's completely different technology, the power elements to it. Petrol stations are everywhere, but then again, EV chargers, there's the EV charger rollout, infrastructure piece. I just think it's just not been thought through, and it's the detail, isn't it? And that's, you could argue that was the detail on the diesel side. Whether they knew about it or not, let's hope that it was just a mistake and not that they
knew about it.
Yeah, it's in the NOx emission side of things, it's a bit like the HVO argument. It's like, okay, like they're focusing again on CO2. But actually, like HVO, it still produces all the nasty stuff. And I get that it reduces CO2, but that HVO is quite energy intensive to get it here in the first place. You've got to get it over from, I think a lot of it comes from Holland, or certainly Europe. And you just think, do you know what? Actually, with all this shenanigans around getting the HVO over and all the rest of it, but just stick with diesel and just have a clear plan of moving towards electric. It just seems to be that the detail is just not there in terms of the strategy, and it's just quite frustrating because people can just poke holes in it, especially when there's U-turns from 2035 to 2030, and no one really knows the actual guidelines now because it's just been taken up so many times. So I think there's just a mass in the UK. There's just a mass, misunderstanding with. I mean, I was reading 7% of people think that all petrol and diesel cars aren't allowed after the after the ban.
Yeah,
So
I've heard that. It's miscommunication, isn't it? People think that literally, if you own like a car, I don't know, a year before, they're going to come and take it off you and say you can't use it. It's like that's not the case.
But part of the problem with this is everything gets broken down to little sound bites, doesn't it? I mean, when that thing happened with Rishi Sunak, I saw the BBC News article, and I posted it on LinkedIn the night before the announcement came out. There was a kind of something got leaked through to the BBC about it, and I said, well, as long as they don't change the ZEV mandate stuff for 2030, it doesn't really make that much difference. But they played on it. They played on the fact that it was unclear to try and make it look like they were adjusting something for EVs. And what then happened the following day is all the people who were on the one end of the spectrum, the anti-EV lot, were kind of going, well, this shows the charging networks are not ready, and this shows that the technology, EVs are not ready for the mass market, and, it's an acceptance of, problems with EVs and so on. I'm like, no, the EV stuff is still 80% of new car sales by 2030. That hasn't changed. If the goal was to give some time for the charging networks to develop and so on, that hasn't happened. That was never changed. What's changed is the hybrid deadline being pushed back by 5 years. And that's actually, that's a completely different kettle of fish, because you can still fill those cars with regular fuel. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you had the kind of the very pro EV end of the spectrum, kind of going, this is outrageous. Why are they uprooting EV deadlines, and kind of talking about, and you kind of go, hang on a minute. You should be saying the EV deadlines haven't changed. You should be at the one end. Yeah, it's almost like the opposite ends of the spectrum took this a different way. Like if the pro EV end of the spectrum should have been going, look, the EV deadlines haven't changed, and the anti EV end of the spectrum should be going, oh my god, the deadlines haven't changed. We're not ready for this. Why haven't they changed it? Why haven't they done anything with it? And it was a really strange. The whole thing was just this complete, just like tsunami of misinformation from all sides, and it's no wonder people are confused.
I think at the time I was really annoyed about the ban, because I didn't know about the ZEV mandate, because I think the only people that actually know about the ZEV mandate were probably in the motor trade at some level, whereas the general public and even EV enthusiasts didn't actually know about the ZEV mandate. So again, it's the communication piece. So really, it hasn't changed at all. 24. Has commented, what worries me as being an EV owner, less fossil fuels means lost revenue and tax. Will EVs tax more to make up the loss? Yeah, of course they will, 100%.
But potentially you could say that actually with the health benefits, there could be savings in other areas. It's one of those things, it's just, you don't know how it's, because I think it was.
It's as simple as that. Even if there's savings, the savings are never going to come to us, Kevin. Come on.
I'd like to hope.
In the post from the government for
those checks.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one day.
Yeah, you'd like to hope, but I mean, the thing is that again, the messaging around that's not clear. The fact that if you look at the new road taxes coming in for EVs, it actually misses out the era of Dieselgate pretty much. So you can still tax your Dieselgate car for. Is it how many it goes up to?
20 quid.
20 quid.
A lot of sub 100 gram cars, so 99 grams or less. A lot of diesel cars in that kind of NEDC tested. So on the old, very optimistic fuel efficiency test cycle, an awful lot of cars under 100 grams. Diesel cars, Euro 5 compliant diesel cars, which are.
I had a Nissan Qashqai, which was supposed to be one of the worst ones. It was the 1.6 DCI, or not the 1.5, the Nissan
1.6.
Yeah, the 1.6.
Yeah. That's the Renault engine as well, isn't it? 1.5 DCI was the Renault Energy engine.
1.5 is the Renault one. The 1.6. I made sure I got the cheapest. I'm good at getting the cheapest of a certain version, as you guys might have noticed. But it was the cheapest. It was red, obviously. +2 Qashqai with the newer 1.6 engine, because it was supposed to be better, more reliable, supposedly. But anyway, we digress. We're talking about diesels. Look at us being balanced. So it's yeah, in terms of getting taxed, we're going to get taxed more, whatever. It'd be interesting to see how they work it. And this is the thing at the moment. And I think this really boils down to everything from a net zero and electrification point of view. It costs money. Infrastructure costs money. The vehicles, in general, cost more money, especially the vans and the buses and the trucks. For sure. So, and like, we are broke. This nation is absolutely broke. You look at the changes that the government are making in certain areas at the moment. It's rather interesting. And all the money's being ploughed into net zero and Ukraine stuff, which is an interesting one. But let's go to Roland. What's wrong with pay per mile as long as it goes to infrastructure?
I mean, that's the interesting thing, because technically with fuel cars, we are paying
I was
per
going
mile.
to say.
It's just hidden, because the more mileage you do, the more tax you pay on your diesel or your petrol. So you are technically paid per mile. It's just, well, you've seen how technology implementation goes wrong. It's how would you actually implement pay per mile on sounds like a fine idea, but how would you do it? How you get people clocking their cars to avoid. There's lots of loopholes that I don't think we could manage to create a system that would log it.
The fairest thing to do is to have some sort of fuel duty that you would be able to. I mean, I say the fairest, like this is a really easy thing to do, and it's not. Is to have a similar thing where you can kind of log whatever your home charger is putting into the car, and have a similar kind of pay per mile thing with EVs. And the interesting thing, I suppose, with that is that you then get into a situation. I mean, fuel duty is actually quite a good eco tax and pay per mile tax, because the bigger and least efficient, and the more you use a bigger, less efficient vehicle, the more you pay in fuel duty on it. And you kind of need that almost for EVs as well, don't you? Because I mean, I think that's one big inconsistency. And we're talking about tax on the comments. Is I wonder at what point efficiency and perhaps weight, battery weight, things like that, are going to start having to come into tax to differentiate between. Once you get to the point where everything's an EV, you're kind of going to need something to differentiate between something that's really energy efficient and small, and something that's, and at the moment they're all counted as the same thing, aren't they? They're all counted as 0 grams per kilometer vehicles. That's going to come in at some point. There's going to have to be some way of kind of differentiating between, enormous, very heavy, very inefficient EVs and you kind of really efficient small stuff, in the same way that there has been with petrol and diesel cars.
I think they should base it on mileage, because clearly anything under 10,000 miles is bad for the environment. And anything like, as you get older, as you get more mileage, obviously it's greener. So I'm going to be paying. I'm going to get paid for my.
Why are you thinking that?
I don't know. Has anyone really bought anything with lots of miles on it? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, I was doing a battery test yesterday, and my 218,000 mile Tesla Model 3 was put in the darkness next to the 238,000 mile Tesla Model 3 that was next to it. So that's coming up on the video on Wednesday with battery test results, which is interesting. But it's a really good point, actually. Maybe that we should do another session on that. How should electric vehicles be taxed in the future? Like that. When's the
budget's Wednesday. Spring statements on Wednesday.
On Sunday then, and then the next one we'll talk about EV tax. I think that might be a good session, and then we can forward our results to the powers that be, because obviously ours is going to be the most balanced opinion. So obviously it's the one that they need to listen to. Okay, cool. I think there should be a focus on efficiency, because actually, if you look broadly across miles per kilowatt hour, there's not a huge difference between something like a Corsa and an EV9. There's not much. There could be like 1 mile per kilowatt hour. I mean, you'll remember from the EV rally, Tim, a certain Warren got a ludicrous amount of efficiency out of an EV9. Yeah, I think basing it on efficiency is a good shout. I mean, you could say you're basing it on weight as well, maybe. I mean, I think that they've got to sort the potholes out. It seems like everyone, the whole country is going mad about it at the moment. They're going to have to do something about it, and I think they'll do like a pothole tax for vehicles over a certain weight, won't they? I don't know. That's a bit of a it's another.
I mean,
Crazy one, but
the reality of it is the fairest way of doing it is to have something equivalent to fuel duty rather than trying to put the infrastructure in place to try and monitor every single mile that everyone does. The simplest way to do it, and it's not a simple thing per se, although all home chargers for like the last 3 years or so have had to have data connections on board anyway. So the simplest way, I guess, would be to just utilize the infrastructure that we've got. But the problem is then all that will happen is people will stop using their home chargers. They'll just plug it in on a 3-pin plug. So there's ways around all sorts.
Apart from you'll lose an extra 10% in efficiency.
True.
You lose 20% on. We talked about this last week. If anyone, not sure if people were on there, but you lose 20% of your electricity off a 3-pin plug charger and about 10% off a wallbox AC charger, and not so much on DC. But we're kind of getting away from the point here. We're talking about the government getting EV strategy right. So I think we need to go back. I mean, the taxing, I think clearly, I don't think anyone would disagree that it's unfair that these diesel vehicles which are less than 100 CO2 emissions or less than 150, what have you, of a certain age, they should be paying more tax. I don't think anybody can argue with that. Why do you think they've not done it?
Because at that age, it's a declining year-on-year selection of vehicles that are over the average age of UK vehicles. I mean, those are older cars anyway. I think the earliest, the newest of those vehicles will be 8 years old this month. So they're old cars now. And they're over the average age of cars in the UK is about the 8-year mark, isn't it? So I think that's the reason why, is that you end up penalising people who've got more limited budgets, perhaps to buy vehicles. So I think, but I mean, what I would have said within that is there's no reason to be taxing pre-2017 EVs at the same rate as those vehicles. I would have left pre-2017 EVs, everything right the way up to your Model S's and all the rest of it. And you kind of, I mean, even you kind of your plug-in hybrids and stuff like that as well. Up to that point, I would be letting those have I'd be letting those off the hook for the tax stuff.
I thought
as
the
well.
2017 EVs and younger were let off.
No, and younger. No, everything from 2001. Everything from 2001 electric will be taxed from April.
I thought it was anything that's 2017 and older. It was still free.
Nope. The band A tax from pre-2017 cars, so anything from 2001 through to April 2017 will be taxed at 20 quid. So everything under 100 grams, so all your old plug-in hybrids, all your Outlanders, and all your i8s and your i3 Rexes and your early Leafs and iMeves and all of that sort of stuff will all be taxed at 20 quid. And I agree with removing that bottom band and maybe even keeping it low, because those are declining. Those are cars that are declining in age quite rapidly. But I would have let EVs, pre-2017 EVs should still have free tax, I think, because people who are buying those cars are buying a vehicle that's got a limited range, that's got 8+ years of wear and tear on the battery. Those are second cars. Those are, and give people a nudge to buy those cars, because I think, even if it's only 20 quid, it's a nudge in the right direction, isn't it?
Dean, I've nearly got to the post office with your t-shirt. You'll be happy to know. Nearly there. The government need to get their head out of there. #E, and regulate and legalize more powerful e-bikes, e-scooters, etc., to allow more local transport and reduce the need for cars locally. Completely agree with you, Dean. I think there needs to be more assistance with that. I want to turn my camera around to show everyone Trikey, because I'm going to sort out a battery for Trikey soon, because I miss her so much. I miss the danger and just like cool. It's just, you think that how many cars that would bring off the road? It'd be so much better, so much better.
I mean, it's because you see lots of reports of them being confiscated. Surely it'd be much better to regulate them. I mean, you could argue that they should actually regulate to some extent. I've just come back from London. The actual normal bikes, because people like to drive those like maniacs as well. You can, if you're a fit cyclist, you can go faster than some of these scooters that are banned and knock someone over and cause them quite an injury. You know, I think there does need to be some sort of regulation. You know, because that's the thing. Because there's no mandatory insurance if you go out on your push bike. You know, even if it's just a simple thing that if you injure someone, there's something to cover it. You could go out on your mountain bike, knock someone over, and there's no kind of comeback. It just needs to be something simple across the board for e-bikes and just something that's there just to protect people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because they can't tax you. I think that's as simple as that, and they can't bring in new laws for bikes because people would be up in arms. So if it's something new and they can't tax it, then they'll just be like, just leave it. And it's just, you know, bearing in mind we've got the rental ones. So, and I think the rental ones do really, really well, but I think they're too slow. I think they do need to be a bit quicker. That's one of the reasons I made Trikey, because I didn't feel safe on one of those rental scooters on the road, because you get all sorts of idiots come past you, whereas I can keep up with idiots. I didn't say that. Let's just move on. So yeah. So what are they getting right then? There must be some things that they're getting right. I mean, they're certainly spending some money on like infrastructure and things like that. I mean, that it is getting rolled out in quite a good way at the moment.
There is one more thing that they're getting quite badly wrong at the moment before we get on to the pros is the van side of things. Still, so what most people know is there's been for a few years, I think it started in 2018, there's been a derogation that's allowed people to drive electric vans up to 4.5 tons gross weight on a standard car license. So instead of them being, so those are technically HGVs. So that was removed in 2018, and then about 18 months ago, so end of 2023, there was a further piece of regulations the regulation that then made that permanent. So it was, instead of it being a temporary derogation, it was a permanent thing, and also they removed the training requirement, which sounds great. But if you're switching from long wheelbase, large, high roof transit vans to electric vans, you still have a number of HGV rules that are in place for those vans. So you have to have an MOT 12 months after registration, as opposed to 36 months like a normal van would. You have to have an electronic speed limiter, and in some cases, if you're going any distance in them, you have to have they have to obey driver's hours rules. So from the point of view of actually operating a fleet of those vans, you end up with additional red tape and stuff to kind of deal with that you wouldn't have to if they were diesel vans. So there's a kind of and you look at that and you kind of go, okay, well, is the weight thing an issue? And if it's not an issue, then take away those additional bits of red tape. But if it is an issue and you need those additional bits of red tape, then should people really be driving them on a car license? Like, there's a real inconsistency in terms of what that actually means, because it's either a problem that people are driving, regardless of what's under the bonnet, physics is physics, right? 4-ton van is still a 4-ton van, whether it's powered by a diesel engine or it's electric. So align those regulations and give people the certainty. And also, it's taken, despite the fact that was announced at the end of 2023, it's, judging by the announcement that came out recently, it's taken until this year to actually put that in place. So we have a complete weird set of misaligned rules for van operators, which is quite hard to deal with, and also introduces complexity if you want to convert those vehicles to electric. So that's another thing that really needs to be sorted out, I think.
We'll see as though on commercial vehicles, I've got something to add to that, but let me just talk in Roland Moore's comment. If public transport worked, car use should reduce, but 1 bus per hour between 9 and 5 just does not work. Sorry, Kevin, did you want to say something?
Actually, because on the van thing, that's the one thing we haven't mentioned, is the electric vans lose their zero road tax, but they go up to over 300.
Yeah.
Which
is huge. Yeah, 320 credits.
If your still vans can be quite compromised on range compared to another, and people will just say, "I'll stick with the diesel then." If you're having to use public charging infrastructure and you've got an electric van, what's the incentive now?
Do you know what? Thanks for highlighting that, guys, because I really didn't know that. Because that's you think about the progress that electric vans have made in the UK market. It's not fantastic. And they're way off the ZEV mandate. For them to bring in a tax like that, I think you might as well shoot yourself in the head.
And it's backdated as well. It's backdated as well.
Yeah,
So that's
everything
that's across the board. So that's been backdated to existing vans as well.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty ridiculous. Something that's also ridiculous, which I think is more of a regulation thing. Whereas a van for your 45-minute break, you can charge HGV.
Yes. Yeah.
HGV, you can't for your 45-minute break. You cannot charge the vehicle. That's not counted as a break, which is a massive negative from an EHGV point of view. So that I can't believe that tax thing. That is ridiculous. But
I
I
didn't realize it, and in a day job, I've got a significant electric van fleet.
There we go. So anybody else not know about that? Anyone know about that other than Alex? Because it just seems there's so much regulation and certain things that need to be put right. I mean, it's like public charging, that's still 20% instead of 5% at home. There's so many things that they could do to put a positive spin. Quite a few, regulations that need to be changed, or playing around with the tax system. And yeah, I don't know how they're coming to these results. I don't know which advice they're coming from. Whose advice they're taking. It does seem to be a bit sporadic, doesn't it?
I think if they don't engage with the correct groups, they should be engaging with groups like EVA England, who've got experience in that sort of they've been with people who've got EVs from the beginning, and they can actually help. The biggest example of that is the charging regulations on contactless. It would have been so simple to do the definition: DC charging, contactless, AC charging. No, that's the simple, because one's much cheaper to implement than the other. So that's a simple thing that they could have done simply, but they did some random thing, anything above 8 kilowatts. Have you ever seen an 8 kilowatt charger?
Yeah,
I had my share of public charging the other day, and I'm going to share out my latest video. And I'll tell you what, it did not go well at all. And I was confident with it. I was thinking, do you know what? It's tap to pay now, be fine. Third charger until I actually got some charge. I just couldn't believe it. But that'll be in the video. So if anyone wants to check that on Wednesday.
Speaking of speaking to the wrong people, do you guys remember the Great British Charge Point?
I vaguely remember the name of it.
Oh yeah, they wanted it to look the same, didn't they? They were doing it like a London bus to make an iconic thing, like the London bus, the London taxi.
If you want a classic example of the government speaking to the wrong people and not speaking to EV drivers, that is a case study in it. So this was revealed when there was the COP, was it 26 in Glasgow a few years ago?
Yeah.
And it's a pedestal AC charger, and it's got a tethered cable on it with a loop on the top for you to hold on to, and it's about kind of, I guess, rib cage diaphragm height, and that's it, and it came out, and I remember looking at it and thinking, that's an odd design for a charger, because for one thing, at that point, Nissan, if you think about the Nissan Leaf, if you think about where the charging hatch is on the Nissan Leaf at the front, I reckon that big loop on the handle wouldn't fit under the hatch of the Nissan Leaf, which is one of the few EVs that's been built in the UK. To have a Great British charging point that can't charge a British-built EV is a massive own goal. Not only that, but I know from a lot of kind of the tethered cables, especially when the motorway services stuff gets picked up, but even so, that's often kind of got mud on it and other bits and pieces. Those connectors are prone to getting damaged, as opposed to like most AC units have a socket on them, because you bring your own cable, you look after your own cable, and you don't have to worry about someone else leaving it in a puddle or whatever. And on top of that, so a good example, I was driving back from BYD launch on Wednesday last week, and I could see a row of Ionity chargers off the side of the M4. I mean, they were quite a long way off the thing, because they're about 7 or 8 foot high with a halo on top. If you've got a little AC charger and you're putting these things in car parks, you need some way of finding the damn things when you're driving around a car park. They need to be tall and have some kind of signage on them. So it's little things that you have issues with. if you're driving an EV, that you know these things, right? You've experienced these things where you've gone into like some big car park somewhere and you can't find the bloody pedestal units because they're hidden behind some rows of parked cars or a bush or whatever. These are things that you would find out very quickly by talking to owners. And no owner's going to go, well, I want a tethered cable with a great big needless loop on the top. That's not what it's about. It's, find out what people are actually struggling with.
So Roland's put that will kill last mile delivery and supermarket home delivery moving to EV. I'm not sure it will kill it. It's certainly not going to help it.
But do you think if you're a company with 10 vans, that's over $3,000 extra a year? You're going to have
inflation every year as well.
Someone.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Dean said, I find it totally baffling that my mate's 2016 2.1 Mercedes diesel that pumps out toxic fumes has £20 tax, yet my small Renault Zoe a year later pays £195. Totally bonkers. Absolutely.
And actually, I had back in, I think 2016, well, actually in 2012, I had a Mercedes and it was really, really efficient and had really low CO2 and was really good on MPG, which probably means due to physics, it was really awful on NOx back then.
It's just, it does seem that they're getting it so wrong in so many steps. Shall we try and find, because we're here for balance, right, guys? Shall we find? Shall we try and find the positives? I mean, what's the good stuff they've done? Come on, guys.
I think the public charge point regulations, generally speaking, on the rapid charge stuff are good. Requiring contactless payment, requiring that uptime, requiring that kind of customer service stuff.
The uptime's
data sharing, 99%. Yeah, the 99%. So there's some differences of opinion on this. I've actually a presentation by one of the charging companies was saying basically we're already incentivized to keep that level of uptime, because if you have a charger that's out of action for a significant period of time, it's expensive kit. You need it to be earning revenue, otherwise it's not. People quickly realize. I mean, again, this is something you realize if you've driven EVs, is that you quickly realize which networks are the good ones. Do we think you avoid the bad ones, don't you?
Do we think that the traditional petrol oil companies are potentially not caring about reliability of EV chargers? Because I'm sure that most of I'm not going to say any brands here, but you know what I mean. Every time I come to their chargers, I can never get them working. And I had that experience recently.
I don't bother. I just skip them. I know which ones work, and I tend to go to those ones. I mean, the other day after
it shouldn't be like that, though, should it? But even though you know, as you highlighted, having that 99% uptime, I think it's great. For the smaller CPOs, you have to make sure that you're purchasing wisely in terms of the right quality of chargers. Your Albertronics, your Ken Powers, etc., and making sure you've got a robust service and maintenance agreement to make sure if something does go down that it's sorted straight away, or that could be a real fly in the ointment. I agree with you, Alex. I think the charging infrastructure regulations are pretty strong, but there's still some work to do. Still a little bit of work to do there. Can we think of any others, though, that from a positive point of view?
Probably the funding around being able to roll those chargers out on the grid scale, because if you think motorway services are in stupid places to put a rapid charger, they're in the middle of nowhere. And you think they've actually, they have done that quite well with, where you see the grid serves, the Apple Greens, all of those rolling out now. They do seem to have start to get that right to get, to work to get the grant funding to get those hard to reach places powered up.
Yeah, Dean's just put the government done well in the early days with the grants for free chargers. If anything, too generous. Would have been better if they charged 0% VAT on home charger installation. Yeah, I kind of agree with that, actually. Free charger, free installation. They were pretty generous to keep the incentive to install home chargers running longer. Because generally speaking, the people that were purchasing electric vehicles in the early days were people, enthusiasts. You probably wouldn't mind having to pay that sort of stuff. But I think that there is still not a mountain to climb, but there's still a hell of a lot of work to do. And again, it just comes down to the money piece. And incentives. Should there be some more incentives? I mean, should there be more business incentives? Because it does seem like the the car market, I think, is just kind of ticking over and looking after itself. And I don't think that's going to improve much more, other than like little things like change the public charging from 20% to 5%. I think the car, I think that is on a steady upward trend, although it could always be quicker. I think there needs to be more focus on van and HGV. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in HGV and van electrification of fleet, but it just seems to be so many. And I'm not just going to talk about the low hanging fruit, because I think there is an opportunity to do a lot more than the low hanging fruit out there at the moment.
I think it's too soon for the stick. You still need the carrot in the HGV and van market.
I do too.
You know, that's
100%.
It's just too soon. It's like you have to be, you know, these are people who sometimes one-man bands, and they're very cost sensitive. Literally that, you know, that 300 quid is enough to say, well, I'm going back to diesel. It's just, you need to really focus on that. And those last mile deliveries are the things where you can make the biggest impact on emissions. You know, you don't want people driving around in 20-year-old dirty, sooty vans. You want them to be in the greener, cleaner vehicles for air quality.
No,
I mean, the most important thing is being strategic with this, isn't it? I mean, that's a lot. We talk about some of the early investments. I mean, things like the plugged-in places schemes, which some people will remember. Some people, I think it's 6, wasn't it, around the country. I don't believe there was any requirement for interoperability between those. So if you had a card for one, you may not be able to access the other. Now, people who've been driving EVs for a long time will remember having a wallet full of cards and not being able to go from like a Source West to a, I don't know, a Source London or whatever, and you know, just not being able to connect the dots and stuff like. I mean, that was a Labour scheme. That was a Labour scheme under the Gordon Brown government. So I mean, that's going back a long time that this stuff has been managed without, you know, announced by Alistair Darling, I believe. So I mean, that's, you know, it's a really old kind of setup. I mean, that shows how long a lot of this stuff's been going on, and what ended up happening with that was that you ended up with kind of these networks. Just there was no kind of long-term vision of them, and a lot of them just kind of fell into disrepair, and they weren't operable, and they ended up with a lot of that network being bought up by private companies who ended up replacing it, fitting their own charges, which in a kind of a sustainability initiative is a bit poor, really. So it needs to have that long-term vision of it's like, yeah, okay, if you're putting these charges in, we'll give you the extra support where you've got the groundwork in place, perhaps to put 7 kilowatt ones in, but you've also got the groundwork to put that you could quickly upgrade that to say a 3-phase, and you could have 22 kilowatt there. Things like that is kind of, and having the, maybe you don't yet need contactless, but you should have the ability to retrofit that at a later date. And, it's little things like that just kind of look that step beyond where we are now, or perhaps where we were when a consultation was carried out 2 or 3 years ago, and kind of go, what do we need in 5 or 10 years' time? And that's not just a number of charging points. That's a kind of strategic view of where they should be, where the pinch points are. I mean, Wales is a great example of this. I mean, Kev's actually had a role in kind of ironing some of this out. Wales has been crap for infrastructure for as long as I can remember. And it's getting better. But I mean, I know Welsh government had, when they were doing the Welsh government's charging strategy, if you were putting rapid chargers in place, there was a requirement or proposal within the requirement that you should take on a cluster of set of sites. So you have some high footfall sites, and you have some that are really low footfall sites in the back end of nowhere that are going to make you no money, but are strategically quite important for helping people have the confidence to go from A to B to C. And I don't see an awful lot of that around the country. It's all based on kind of, we're going to have 300,000 charging, rapid chargers in place by this date. And you kind of go, yeah, but if they're all clustered around, big cities and stuff, are they in the right place? Are we supporting rural communities, or are we leaving those behind, like broadband and other bits and pieces have done in the past? And I think that's an important thing to consider as well.
It's a really good point, because this place in Huntingdon that I know, there is, I can't remember if it's a GridServe or Instavolt, but it's something along those lines. It's quite a well-known CPO, charge point operator. And then literally you could throw a cricket ball, and there's like a Dobby's Garden Centre with a load of 10 power chargers out there, or BEV, one of the two. And it's just like, well, hang on a minute, don't actually need. There's plenty there. I mean, it'd be perfect for maybe in 5 years' time, but actually, you're right. I think it's not just about number of charges; it's about having them in the right places. You know, like the Waleses and the Cornwalls. So people aren't worried about that one, 2 or 3 times a year where they go on holiday and they get worried about queues at charges or not enough availability, and that could then start to give people, like you said, the confidence. I think bearing in mind we're selling all of our petrol cars at the moment. If anybody wants a petrol auto Mazda 3 for £4,000, it's ready to go. We're selling the camper van, which is going to go on eBay soon. It's on Marketplace. So we will literally have only electric cars. So it'd be really interesting to see how my other half gets on with going away with the kids, not me. I think having those sort of strategic charging spots in those places like your Wales and your Cornwall and the places Scotland, at a certain point, where we know that the charging infrastructure isn't as good, I think that will speak volumes, and that'll give people the confidence, and it will encourage more people to transition to electric.
So the Wales thing kind of got solved more by the car technology getting better than the charging infrastructure. I mean, it's got a lot better now. I mean, actually, a few weeks ago, I went from Swansea to Pembrokeshire. And when I started doing, we had a Renault Zoe, and we could do all of the UK, but couldn't go from Swansea to Tenby because there wasn't enough charging infrastructure. Now I've got a car that can literally do there and back and use like 20%. There's loads of charging infrastructure.
So I had a week in, it would have been September 2014, and I know that based on where everything was at the time. It was around the time of the MPG Marathon. It might actually been the MPG Marathon where I first met Kev, but I was driving around in a Zoe at that point, and I ended up with a week where I had an event in Liverpool and another event in Llandudno within the same week. So basically straight up through the middle of Wales, both of them. And I was driving the Zoe at the time, and I couldn't do it in the Zoe. I would have had to have gone M4, M5, M6, and then back along the A55. And it would have taken, I think, 4 or 5 charging stops to get me up there. I mean, this is back in the days when it would have been kind of half hour to add like 50 miles or whatever. Or I ended up just doing it in the Polo. I can go straight up through the middle of Wales in the Polo and go there and back on one tank. Those things are getting solved partially by the cars, but also you are starting to find better infrastructure in those places. But if you're installing, 150 or 350 kilowatt chargers in the back end of nowhere in Wales, the wiring and the kind of the cellular connectivity and things to those is can be challenging, and all sorts of other bits can be. Although, ChargeBase Scotland is a pretty good example of actually getting that infrastructure right in the back end of nowhere. But
then the problem with ChargeBase Scotland, which me and Alex have on our first EV rally experience,
that's so true.
The problem with the ChargeBase Scotland stuff is it for a brief period ended up stifling people putting there because they did it for free. So no companies put the charges in themselves, other ones, because how would you compete as a private business or as private CPO if everything around you is free? Because I think that was the mistake that a lot of, because that was charged by the Scottish government. I think it was a mistake to do charging at the beginning, like someone said about the home chargers. I think it was a mistake to do something for totally free, because then people don't value the infrastructure when it's free. So I think they should have done, even if it was a nominal charge, it should never have been totally free.
I love a free charge.
I love a free charge too.
Yeah,
who doesn't?
But
I got a free charge on Thursday, finished work, went to the hotel where they got free charging. I literally just sat for half an hour waiting for a space, because it's just so tight. Because I know that there's a couple of people that go to the gym and then they leave, and there'll be a couple of spaces. Wheeled it in and charged Lucky. That's the name of the new Tesla. So I got Rusty and Lucky. I'm not sure how long Lucky will be lucky for based on recent experiences, but we'll come with that. So my dad's just put, what about charging points being mandatory for hotels? I don't think that was ever a thing, was it? I think it would be a good idea.
You have to do it for a certain, if you're refurbishing a building, don't you have to put in a certain number of charging points? If you've got a certain number of parking spaces, you've got to prepare a certain percentage of, I think it's something like 10% of them have got to preparation work for chargers to go in future if you're doing heavy refurbishment on a building.
I kind of love the way the French have done it, with the mandatory solar canopies on car parks now of a certain size. I mean, that is, do you think of that? That's quite radical.
Dean, don't 100% agree with Kevin. You can never 100% agree with Kevin. That's just maybe 95, but yeah, no, solar canopy, absolutely. Even for the lighting and stuff, from keeping the carbon.
Well, I believe I read somewhere that now solar panels are cheaper than proper high grade plywood. So you just build stuff out of solar panels now rather than plywood.
That makes sense. You got to have a look at the CO2 emissions on both, I suppose. But there does seem to be a few deals coming out for solar at the moment. Say Octopus are doing 0%. See quite a few deals at the moment. I really do want to have solar and a battery, but I really want a Tesla battery. I don't want none of this.
You and your brand loyalty, Tim.
Yeah, but that way I can put it on my Tesla app, and then I'll have 3 things on my Tesla app. It's like collecting stickers. I think the only sticker book I've ever had was the Thundercat sticker book.
Oh yeah, showing your age there.
Thundercat. Look, I've got two things. Look, there's Rusty and Lucky, orange and green. Look like a couple of Tic Tacs, don't they? But yeah,
you're gonna get them wrapped to match that, though.
Mate, I haven't got 2 pennies to rub together at the moment, so yeah, probably not for a while, unless somebody wants to sponsor, one of the cars or 2 of the cars, what have you. In talking about sponsorship, we could really do with some sponsorship on the YEV podcast or the Chargeheads UK channel in general. So bearing in mind, we're hitting some good numbers now. If anybody hears of any businesses that want to be highlighted, which are EV related or car related, then give us a shout. I'm sure they would benefit.
You're going to point to the top and say your logo here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we can do a little thing where it's like, like how podcasters say, oh, I use this all the time. I use this, and this was much better than X, Y, Z. I don't know. I'm pretty good at cheesy adverts. So maybe crisps, like some. I'm not really a what's it guy. Don't like the orange round the mouth. Always put me off. Just remember this girl that in infant school, she always used to eat what's it. So she was ginger and she had orange round her mouth. It stuck with me for years. Kev?
That's a problem with the current. At the moment, I've got a Polestar 4, and it's got a digital rear view mirror. You speaking about like crisps and stuff. If you were to eat something, you can't check if you've got it all over yourself in the rear view mirror because it's just a screen that looks out of the back window.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Do you not have sunlight? Do you not have them in the sun visors though?
I'm quite tall. I'd like to remain seen out of the windscreen.
No, but I mean, if you're just looking to check if you've got whatsits around your mouth, you just flip the sun visor down, surely.
That was too easy a solution, Alex. I didn't think of
that. Malcolm's goes a bit rogue here. Not rogue, probably a little militant on the EV charging suggestions to hotels. What I do when leaving hotel reviews is always mention EV charging and criticize when they don't have it. 1 star for no charges, 5 star for at least 1. There we go. That'll help.
You wouldn't like the Formula 1 hotel I stayed in once in Calais. You were lucky you didn't have a bathroom in that one. It was literally down the end of the corridor.
Was it one of the squatting toilets?
It was a very budgety hotel.
I love a squatting toilet. You definitely need a strong coffee to do the business in them. I think we digressed slightly.
Consumer advice there.
We're talking more about European toilet strategy at the moment, which is it's kind of similar. So EV strategy, right? So we've talked about the pros, we've talked about the cons. I did write down a couple. I mean, job generation. I think there has been quite a lot of green jobs off the back of this. Although there does seem to be quite a lot of people that have been in the green industry and then still trying to get a job in the green industry. So I'm not sure if that's more recently been more, whether the number of jobs are actually reducing. Because you think about it's a bit like the .com bubble. There was loads of charge companies out there, but they've been whittled down quite a bit. there doesn't seem to be that many battery companies out there, and you'd think that that would be something that would grow exponentially with the challenges around power in the UK. But yeah, certainly seems to be it seems to be good for the economy from a jobs point of view. Do you see that developing, guys? I mean, do you think that's going to start slowing down? Do you think that's going to develop further? Do you think it's going to grow into newer industries from the green side? There must be new jobs being created, right?
Look at the tech industry. 30 years ago, the tech industry wasn't what it was. You think now, number of data centers you've got, and there's people employed to build, to do that and stuff. It's like, it's going to change, isn't it? People are going to just move into new industries. I think the important thing is with the car side is that we get these mechanics trained up in these new skill sets for EVs away from the traditional ICE engines, because we need that, because it's quite difficult. Sometimes you go to a dealership and they've got 1 or 2 ICE technicians, so your car has to wait if it's an EV because they haven't got the skilled people to do that yet.
You've got shortages, massive shortages, haven't they, of EV technicians in the UK? The IMI keep putting figures out. It's quite big, and it's projected to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the fleet grows.
Well, I'll certainly give a shout. I know that RHEL, Ralph Hosier Engineering, they have quite a few training sessions, and they've got quite a good facility there, actually, and they do a lot around bus training for bus EV technicians. But I think you're right. I think more and more needs to be put out there for, to reduce the number of potential accidents, thinking that the orange wires are just an extra thick cable tie they need to snip, which could be the case. But yeah, I think job creation, I think, is certainly a positive from the EV transition, and maybe the government need to help support the training in that a bit more. But you could argue it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because we need to have more electric. Certainly, I didn't understand that. Oh, sorry. Nor did the audience, I don't think. But so yeah, I think there does need to be more training. But again, it just keeps coming back to the money thing, doesn't it? It keeps coming back to that, and taxing certain people. What's been in the news recently, I don't think, or businesses of the animal variety, isn't really going to help. So I think there needs to be more focus on growth. I think it will always come back to the money side of making this EV strategy work, and focusing on all the things that we mentioned earlier in terms of regulations and getting it right in terms of the strategy.
I think the money thing is absolutely fundamental to this, and I've mouthed off about this on this podcast before, but you can track the flatlining of the private EV registrations at around the start of 2022, when conflict in Ukraine kicked off and energy prices were rising, and interest rates were rising and mortgage prices were rising.
I disagree with that, because in 2022 there weren't many EVs being registered because they were all delayed massively.
No, it's 2021 was the year so 2021 there was an uptick in private registrations and fleet registrations, and it flatlines at the start of 2022, and it's never got back to. It's just kind of the fleet side has continued to grow, some of which obviously is cannibalizing from the retail side, but the retail side has been flat or tailing off since the start of 2022, and that's around the time that the real kind of the pinch on consumer finances really started.
Yeah, because I remember ordering late 2021 the Skoda Enyaq, and with all the government grants, etc., and then it was delayed until like September.
Yeah, they were taking so over a year was quite common at that point.
Yeah, and then I bought the used Tesla, the cheapest long range in the country. Not that I did a video about it, it's unlike me. And then I sold the Skoda after having it a day and made about 11 grand. Disgusting. But there we go. So really sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, it's very expensive to buy a new car in ways that it wasn't 4 years ago. It's like often kind of hundreds and hundreds of pounds more expensive, and I think that's the big issue. And I think people talk about EV demand and all the rest of it. I think there's more EV demand than the new car sales suggest that there are. And I think if we were still dealing with low interest rates and we hadn't had that resulting hike in new car costs around the time of 2021 when chips, the shortage of semiconductor chips and long waits for vehicles and all the list prices all crept up. I think you would be seeing a much healthier EV market in the UK, regardless of confusing policies or FUD or stories of airport fires and all the rest of the stuff that tends to get credited with holding the market back. I think a lot of it is financial, and so anything that the government can do financially to kind of just nudge people in that direction is really valuable at the moment. That doesn't mean pumping like loads and loads and loads into incentives, but it does mean just finding ways just to make that transition that little bit more affordable.
Yeah, because what you don't want to do is make it so that basically the manufacturers just match the price of the money they've got off. You do need to make it so it is a genuine. I mean, you are starting to see normalization with some new models coming out, because it's all the RV stuff, isn't it? So you've got new models that aren't going to erode a residual value because there wasn't one to do. So they are becoming a bit more affordable. Frontera being one.
So, well, no, not just the Frontera. So a year ago, I was driving a top spec Corsa, so an ultimate spec Corsa, and it was a little under £40,000, about £39,200. You can now buy an ultimate spec electric Grandland for less than 40 grand. Now, there is one thing you have to do if you are doing that. All the press materials say that the two low spec ones are under 40 grand, and that's correct. But if you get the ultimate spec, which is what I've got, it's £40,495. But if you go into the options on it and you take the panoramic roof off, it takes £500 off the list price, and it brings it under £40,000. So that means all versions of it can be bought for, all three trim levels can be bought for under £40,000. It's a huge amount of car. I'd make, if they don't adjust the VED, I think that would be quite a sensible thing to do, because it becomes a very expensive panoramic roof. You'd have to have it in white, because everything else is a cost option. But yeah, if you take the panoramic roof off a top spec electric Grandland, you get a 300-mile range electric SUV, like quite a large one, fully loaded with focal audio, IntelliLux LED headlights, adaptive cruise control, and all the other gubbins that comes with it for a fiver under 40k. That's amazing. It's gone from being a Corsa to being a large SUV like a Grandland within a year. So yeah, I mean, the costs are coming down.
What else can we talk about from an EV strategy point of view that we haven't covered already? I think we've covered a lot of the ins and outs of it. What else can we cover? Tariffs.
Yeah.
Okay. So
this is a massively double-edged sword, I think, is that if the government really wants to push people to get into EVs, and they have to put the catfish among the what were the kind of the fish that they used to transport on vessels, and they'd have the catfish amongst them just to keep them swimming around. They have a predator inside the tank just to kind of make sure that everyone else stayed on their toes. It's an unpopular opinion, but I mean, the Chinese manufacturers are going to force, without tariffs, the Chinese manufacturers will force everyone else to cut their prices, and it'll make EVs more affordable. And so if they put tariffs on those vehicles and price them out of the market, then it's an unpopular opinion, I know, in the automotive industry, but there's that's a good way to kind of put downward pressure on prices, is to allow the Chinese cars to come into Europe without tariffs on them, and into the UK, which the government is still doing, without tariffs on.
Yeah, so let me get this right. So Europe putting tariffs on Chinese cars, and obviously America are. I mean, I was watching something literally the other day talking about tariffs against China from America being a bit tricky at the moment, because I think they're at 20. They were at 10%, now they're at 20%, and now they're looking to push it up a bit further, which might encourage China to get a bit narky and go and find some semiconductors in a certain island that they've been eyeing up for a while. So yeah, in terms of the tariffs, so we're not putting any tariffs on China at the moment, right? No. But there's still the expense of these Chinese electric vehicles still so much higher than they need to be. I mean, they could really make an indentation on the rest of the market by price them a lot more cost effective. You could argue the MG4 was perfect to that, like 25 grand, but it seems like nobody else has been brave enough, or they're just being a bit too greedy on the RRP.
No, I think it's hard to say, isn't it? I mean, you can't access the figures behind the
Behind the
behind the
wall,
list prices and stuff. Yeah,
behind the
so you don't
China's
know how
wall.
much money everyone's making on these vehicles, or where they kind of keep it, keep it coming in. But China, in its own way, is putting some downward pressure on global manufacturers to keep up. Otherwise, they're just not competitive. And as with the credits that you buy, traditional car manufacturers having to buy from, in some cases, from other manufacturers to kind of meet ZEV mandate targets. They're kind of being pushed to, we're not seeing the same level of tariffs being imposed over here as we are in Europe and so on. So
Yeah, well, we have actually completed a full hour. I think we could probably go on a bit longer on this particular subject, but we're going to be talking about the budget next week. I'm sure Alex will have all the info on that one. That is his party piece, knowing all the info, as has been displayed today with the tax cost, which was unbelievable, £300 from April on every
More
van.
than 300, isn't it? It's 300
320, about 320, isn't it?
It's getting worse every minute. So yeah, we'll be talking about the budget, what's happening with EV and cars in general next week, and the week after we're gonna. I think after our chat today, I think it'd be good to talk about how we can. What would be a good way of taxing electric cars moving forward? I think that would be quite an easy one to do, to be honest. I think we'd wrap that up quite quickly. So we'll try and think of something else as well. But just in terms of what's going on this week on Chargeheads UK YouTube channel, it's got the battery test results of Lucky, which is a temporary name for my new Tesla Model 3, which has done 218,000 miles now. There's a few updates on that Wednesday. If you haven't watched the video, I put out a video last week about me going to see it, picking it up, etc. And I've got plenty of work to do with Dynamon, with EV transition of buses, HGV and vans. So hit me up if you are looking for an EV strategy using your own data for that. Kev, Alex, what are you up to?
So I've got the Polestar 4 this week, which is actually proving to be huge on range. Literally, without trying, it can do 400 miles to a charge, which is nuts. I will be slightly honest with it. It is quite a wide car. if I'm so, if you were to have one, you do need to be mindful of width restrictions, because you could pay for it if you don't. But I mean, it's a lovely car, but it is on the bit on the wide side. It's wider than an EV9, so
Wow,
only just.
that's crazy.
But yeah, it's 400 miles. I mean, this is I've had the debate with loads of people on LinkedIn that EVs are no good for long distances on the motorway. It's like this. Literally, I drove to London and used 46% battery from Swansea to London. It's like I needed to stop more than the car needed to.
Well, it's got a longer range than the Polo.
Well, but I genuinely think that range isn't that much of an issue, because you can only realistically, if you've got a 7-kilowatt charger and you've got 7 hours of night rate, you can only really put 49 kilowatt hours in. And I can't remember if I mentioned this last week, but realistically, you don't really need anything bigger than a 60, 70, late 70 kilowatt hour battery. Otherwise, it's just dead space for cells. You might as well have a lighter vehicle that's more efficient. Obviously, if you're doing a longer journey, cost-effective public infrastructure helps with that. But yeah, I don't think you need electric. I don't think you need a car with that much range, really. But there's me with my.
It's all about the charging speed and efficiency, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. Nailed it. And the cost of the chargers. So Tesla wins.
Yeah.
And on that bombshell.
Well, that's how I got home from BYD the other day, as I stopped off at the Tesla charger in Milton Keynes and put the grand land on that, and it was great.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I know I am.
What are you up to, Alex?
This week's all about the budget for me, as I'm sure won't surprise you. Lots of my usual secret squirrel EV related stuff going on in the background, but yeah, the budget is my big assignment this week, I think. So yes, I will be. I'm sure sick to death of talking about it by certainly by Thursday lunchtime. So,
well, hopefully not by end of play Sunday.
I'll have warmed back up for that. Don't worry about it. I'll have plenty to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, put on your preconditioning on late Saturday, mate, and we'll be all good. Yeah. On that awful joke, thank you very much everyone for watching, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for chipping in, everyone, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Cheers.